giving you a bit of a prayer concern that I have. Um, Eden will not stop listening to the song Let It Go. Okay? It doesn't matter where we are. I mean, we could be at home and it's that same song. You know what song I'm talking about, the song from the movie Frozen. I mean, it's just constantly at play at home. And the thing is, and I made a terrible decision in which I bought the CD from the movie Frozen after we saw it. And so it's not just that we're listening to the song Let It Go at home, but now we can take it wherever we go, okay? So Let It Go has been in our car for I don't know how long, just on constant repeat. The other day, Sarah and I had to run out and do a few errands. I'm leaving for a conference here today, and we were running some quick errands, and it's just constant. And with Eden, she loves this song so much that if Sarah and I are talking over top it, she will yell and say, "No talking!" And we have to start over all the way from the beginning, another round of Let It Go. So I really am coming before you like, you need to pray for me because I'm going to go insane. And I recognize this song. The truth is, the song is not just popular with little kids like Eden's age, but it's an incredibly popular song with maybe some of you, with adults. It was in 2013 one of the most downloaded songs that people got. In 2014, I think right now, it is the most downloaded song in 2014. It won an Oscar, for goodness sakes, for Best Song in a Motion Picture. I mean, everywhere you turn is the song Let It Go. And it's starting to drive me crazy for a couple of reasons. Now, I'm not going to deny the fact that it's a good song. I mean, like musically, and the way it builds, and the swell of it, and the voices, and the performance, the theatrical nature. I mean, it's a good song. Let It Go is a pretty decent, good song. If we're talking in terms of like a Disney catalog of songs, it's pretty good. But the truth is that if you really stop and think about the lyrics of Let It Go, it's a pretty jacked up song. Like, if you really stop and listen to the lyrics, like, I don't know how you feel. Like, I don't know if you've got kids or grandkids or nephews or nieces that are singing this song left and right, but the lyrics are really messed up. So this is the story behind the movie Frozen, if you've seen it, is that it tells the story of two sisters, Elsa and Anna, and it's discovered very early on in Elsa's life that she has this amazing magical ability to be able, with her mind, I think the technical term is cryokinetic powers, in which with her mind she can freeze things or create wintry conditions, right? And very early on, she actually does something in one of these kind of fun moments of building this wintry landscape for her little sister Anna, that she actually wounds Anna. And so this decision is made early on in Elsa's life that maybe she should just kind of stay tucked away, locked away in a room where she can't hurt anybody with these mysterious powers that she has. Well, as the story goes on, you find out that the parents have passed away, and all of a sudden it's time for Elsa. She's come of age to be able to take over the kingdom and rule over the kingdom. And so the kingdom is thrown open. She finally leaves this room she's been locked away in for most of her life. And yet what happens is she accidentally unleashes this wintry chaos in the whole kingdom, like locking it in this deep freeze and in this deep winter. And so what happens is she's so horrified and terrified by these powers that she begins to flee into the mountains, and that's when you cue the song Let It Go. These are the lyrics to Let It Go. The snow glows white on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen. A kingdom of isolation, and it looks like I'm the queen. Don't let them in. Don't let them see. Be the good girl you always have to be. Conceal. Don't feel. Don't let them know. Well, now they know. Let it go. Can't hold it back anymore. Let it go, turn away, and slam the door. I don't care what they're going to say. Let the storm rage on. Cold never bothered me anyway. It's funny how some distance makes everything seem small, and the fears that once controlled me can't get to me at all. It's time to see what I can do. To test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. Let it go. I'm one with the wind and sky. Let it go. You'll never see me cry. Here I stand, and here I'll stay. Let the storm rage on. I'm never going back. The past is in the past. Let it go, let it go. I'll rise like the break of dawn. Let it go, let it go. That perfect girl is gone. Here I stand in the light of day. Let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway. This is the anthem of like thousands of kids. That's pretty jacked up, okay? Now, I know a lot of people are going to sit back and say, oh my goodness, this dude's overthinking it. And you're a killjoy. But I mean, in all honesty, when you sit back and you listen to that song is nothing but the glorification of extreme isolation that's going to cause huge damage in this girl's life and in the continued lives of other people around her. Am I wrong on that? Here I stand and here I stay. I don't care if the storm rages on. Kingdom of isolation, I'm the queen, and I'm cool with that. Let it go. And like, this is an anthem that kids are singing. Eden is constantly singing this song, Let It Go. And sometimes I've tried to stop her and say, Eden, can we talk about that song a little bit and kind of revisit it in the context of the story? But as would be the case with a 4.5-year-old, she just looks at me very blankly before she starts singing again. Let it go, let it go. Now, I know you're starting out saying, dude, thanks for ruining Let It Go for all of us this morning. And where on earth are you going with this morning? Where I'm going with this is, quite frankly, this whole song that Elsa sings in Frozen that's won Oscars, that's one of the most downloadable songs. I mean, there's a very real reason why we resonate with the song and we love it so much. It's not just because it's a good melody and the theatrical build and swell of it. I mean, sure, we're drawn to it just by way of the power of music. But I'm not entirely sure that it's not also that maybe we're drawn to the words because we resonate with it. Because one of the things that I think is very true is that all day long, that whole Let It Go song is an anthem that we sing. Look at this. I think really we sing a song every day that I think could be distilled down to this. Now, it's not as memorable or as catchy as Let It Go, but it's the same kind of idea as Let It Go. I've got things in my life that I don't know how to deal with. And I don't know who I can even trust to help me in it all, and I'll probably just hurt or disappoint whoever tries to help anyway. And everyone around me has issues that they don't know how to deal with. And if I try to help them, they're just going to end up hurt or disappointed. So I'm not going to deal with this thing in my life or those things in their life because it's just too much. I'm just going to let it go. I'll just be over here on my own. Because what happens, I think, is if we borrow this terminology from this song, Let It Go, is that's what's going on in the building projects in our life, is that we're constantly building these kingdoms of isolation where we're just kind of living life the way we can best live life. We don't want to let people in. We are constantly locking people out. We're slamming the door, deadbolting it. I don't want you in my life. I'm not particularly concerned if I'm going to be in your life. I'm just going to here I stand and here I stay. And I know this whole storm could be raging on, not just outside the doors, but in the confinement of where I've locked myself away, but I'm going to let it go. Cold never bothered me anyway. All day long, we are building these kingdoms of isolation in our lives. That's the anthem for us all throughout time. Let it go. And yet, that's not the anthem that we're called to sing in the church, is it? This is the one another that I've found myself drawn to in this particular point in the series. 1 Peter 4:9. Offer hospitality to one another. You know what's funny is I almost skipped this one another. We're doing this series called Life Together, and what does it look like biblically and practically for us to do life together? And in particular, with regard to how we do life within our house churches, within the smaller circles of our house churches. And my entry point are these one another passages. There's something like 60 of them in the New Testament. And what's funny is very early on I jotted down that I think I ought to cover this one, offer hospitality to one another. But I almost skipped right past it. Because I really wrestled with, is this really all that important? Because quite frankly, it's very tempting to just jump to some of the jazzier ones, the ones that set off fireworks. Like I was very tempted this morning, how about I just leapfrog this, forget this, because I ended up doing love one another for 2 weeks instead of 1 week. And so maybe I just jump right into the real meatiness of teach one another or admonish one another. Just get to one of those jazzier, flashier ones. But the problem that I face is that this is actually something that God takes very seriously in the New Testament. Offer hospitality to one another. In fact, the only occurrence, it's not just in 1 Peter 4:9, but in Romans chapter 12, verse 13. From Paul, the Apostle Paul says to the church, practice hospitality. Hebrews 13, verse 2, we don't know who wrote it, but another one of the major New Testament writers. Hebrews 13:2, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. This isn't just one-time occurrence, like maybe this was a problem for the people that Peter was writing to in 1 Peter. This seems to be one of these issues that God was very passionate about it through different authors in the New Testament. And quite frankly, Reunion, if I had more time this morning, I could spend I don't know how much time going through a bevy of texts in the Old Testament that deal with issues of hospitality, in which Israel, which depending on how you land, on how is Israel related to the church, is the church kind of like a modern-day Israel, all those kinds of things. But there's some kind of continuity there. They are God's people in the Old Testament, and God consistently calls out to them through poetry and through Proverbs and through the prophets, saying over and over again, be hospitable. Be hospitable to your brothers and your sisters, fellow Jewish men and women and children. Be hospitable to the strangers and the sojourners, the aliens in the land. I mean, this isn't new in the New Testament. God has been passionate all throughout Old and New Testament history with this idea of practicing hospitality, of showing hospitality, of offering hospitality to one another. Why? Why is God so passionate about hospitality being shown in the church, about hospitality being shown here in Reunion? Because when you sit back, you think to yourself, is God really getting that worked up about whether or not we hold quaint little Martha Stewart-like parties in our home? I mean, from a conventional understanding of hospitality, is God really that worked up about whether or not I look at you and say, sure, you need a place to crash, that's totally fine? Why is God getting so worked up about that? That he's put that up here in such a way that he's repeated it by major authors in the New Testament, and it's been a common thread throughout the Bible. Why? Why is hospitality so incredibly important to God? I think it helps if we look beyond our conventional understanding of what hospitality is to really get at what God is really getting at. One of the things that I pointed out to you about this first one another we looked at, love one another, and this two-parter that I did, is I said when you read that in John chapter 13, verse 34, the whole chapter of John 13 and everything that's going on in that chapter is incredibly important to understand what that love one another means. Didn't I tell you that? All of these one another's, when you explore them, it's incredibly important that you pay attention to the context of what's going on. Let's just take 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9. This is what's leading up to this commandment from Peter, offer hospitality to one another. The phrase that I've liked to use the last couple of weeks is, this is the gathering storm of thought before we get to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 1, the time has come to be done with sin. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 2, believers do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. We can go on here. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 3, you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7, the end of all things is near, be alert. I think if you sum it up, what he gets into here is, you've got things in your life that you don't know how to deal with, but you need to. And everyone around you has issues they don't know how to deal with, but they need to. And so then 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9, and so you need to offer hospitality to one another. Now you tell me, when you think about the entire context of 1 Peter chapter 4, this drives me insane. If you study like commentaries that scholars have written about 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9, and it comes to hospitality, all they ever talk about is, yeah, it seemed like a really good practice in a hostile environment for them to open up their homes. That's all they ever discuss. The problem I have with that is the whole context of this commandment says, life is a mess and you need help. You've got these things in your life. And really, if I can even borrow some of the language, of course, not taken as far as the movie Frozen does, but you have this great power to do incredibly destructive things because of the freedom and the abilities that God has given you. And you often, if you're honest, make a mess of things. And yet you heard the thoughts in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1, 2, and 3, and yet we are called to no longer sin, to no longer carouse about those that don't know Jesus Christ, but we're to live this life that's honoring to Him, but that doesn't do destruction to our brothers and sisters, but brings things back together, puts them right, mends them. It binds up all of these wounds. And yet we struggle sometimes. What do I do in this circumstance? What do I do right now? What do I say? How do I act? What am I to believe? How do I untangle this mess? That's the whole context of 1 Peter chapter 4 is your life is a mess and you need help. You need others. Show hospitality to one another. Do you really think, given that context, that what God is getting at through his servant Peter in the writing of this is, make sure you have dinner parties from time to time? Or make sure someone crashes on your couch from time to time? Could it mean that? Yeah. But don't you think God is getting at something deeper? Don't you think that when God says offer hospitality to one another, he is ultimately saying this? You need to let others into your heart and into your story, and you cannot afford to stand at some cool distance locked away, you and your issues. You can't. That show hospitality to one another is God's effort to try and create this great circle of hospitality in which I am looking to you and I'm saying, not just do I want you to come into my house, I want you to come into my heart and help me and heal me. And that you in return, if you're faithful to this text, is what you're doing is you're looking at me and saying, I want to let you into my life, Brian, into not just my home, though that might be the start of it, but into my heart and into my story, into things that are fractured, into things that are broken, into the nitty-gritty messiness, the tangled mess that is my life right now. I want to let you in because I'm tired of standing at some cool, calm distance saying, here I stand and here I'll stay, because the storm is raging around and we know it's doing great damage. You know, I go further and say this, don't you think that God, maybe, yes, he's calling us to open up our home. Maybe he is. I mean, is he calling us to offer hospitality in the more conventional sense? It could be. But such acts are always a physical means for a spiritual end. It's like this physical welcome for a more spiritual welcome. I think the guy who's helped me with this more than anybody else is Henry Nouwen. I've quoted him before, read several of his books, not all of them. He's written so many different books, and all of them that are just so moving and brilliant to me. And this is who helped me very early on in this, because for so often I brushed off this one another passage of hospitality, and yet it speaks to me so much about what we now do in our house churches, or what we should be doing in our house churches. Because what Nouwen really impresses again and again, and he takes very passionately this call to the church to show hospitality to one another, as he says what happens is we live our lives in these kingdoms of isolation, locked away so much that no matter what, even with some of the people we know very well, we have become strangers. And hospitality isn't just merely saying, come, let us break bread. That is just the start of it. Come, let us break bread in order that maybe our hearts may be broken open. That we might be swapping stories of this journey that we're on. That make no mistake about it, this physical welcome that I give to you is really a grand spiritual welcome in which we need to unlock some things here together. To become vulnerable a bit. To lay some things of significance down before each other. You know, I think really what comes down to this is that in the heart of church culture today, there's this battle between two anthems, let it go and let me in. And there's only one anthem when you read these texts that we ought to be singing, it's let me in. You remember the other song in the movie Frozen? This is going to be one of those things where I wake up the next morning and I'm like, did I talk about Frozen that much in a sermon? But do you remember the song of the younger sister? Anna? It's actually there before Let It Go. That in those moments in which Elsa's locked away in this room, and you know this song, every single day is what seems to be set up in this cartoon, that every single day Anna is going and knocking relentlessly on her door. Remember? Do you want to build a snowman? There's the lyrics to this one. Do you want to build a snowman? Come on, let's go and play. I never see you anymore. Come out the door. It's like you've gone away. We used to be best buddies, and now we're not. I wish you would tell me why. So do you want to build a snowman? I think it's lonely, all these empty rooms, just watching the hours tick by, tick-tock, tick-tock. Elsa, please, I know you're in there. People are asking where you've been. They say, have courage, and I'm trying to. I'm right out here for you. Just let me in. One of the reasons I do love the movie Frozen, and I'm not ripping on the movie Frozen, is I love the fact that, quite frankly, it is the story of two anthems duking it out. Let it go or let me in. And what I'm thankful for by the end of it, spoiler alert, is that the right one wins. And that is really the battle of anthems, even within the heart of the church. Because what you have to understand is the building of kingdoms of isolation. And by our unwillingness to become vulnerable before one another and let others in, that's not just pervasive in culture, that is pervasive in church culture. It is. One of the things that happens to us all the time is that whenever we start to speak of something that is smaller and something that is more intimate, something that's going to get messy, something that's going to get awkward, something that might get uncomfortable, we just want to shun that and step away from that. There's a reason why you have always got so many more people at larger gatherings than smaller gatherings. It's where things get real. It's where all of a sudden you've allowed these people to come and relentlessly knock on your door. Just let me in. When you were perfectly fine sitting there saying, here I stand and here I'll stay. And there's a reason why. You know, it's one of these things that happens, and the Christian Standard released their big list of megachurches, and I'm not ripping on megachurches, but there is a reason why there continues to be radical growth within megachurches. It's because we love the anonymity, the anonymous nature of being a part of something large, that if I can just get in and get back out, and I don't have to deal with intimacy and smallness and vulnerability, then that's my game plan. Because I can keep building this kingdom. And I see this happen all the time in the church. We will sit somewhere at a potluck meal, chowing down chicken, just laughing, having fun. And then the very following Tuesday, all of a sudden we realize, did you know that Bill left his wife? Bill, I was just in Sunday school with him. We were just eating chicken at the potluck. It's because you didn't know Bill. And Bill didn't know you. It's because what happens so often for us is that even within the church, we design programs that become kingdoms of isolation. All these rows, we're doing it this morning, everyone facing forward, not circles, not looking at each other, very barely interacting, getting in and getting out, and just get in my car and get home. This happens all the time in the church. Can you see why God speaks into that? Offer hospitality to one another. Because that's not temple talk or huge, large synagogue talk. That's you got to get in someone's home. You got to pull up a chair to a table. And you have got to break bread, and you've got to allow your heart to be broken for your brother and sister and for them to feel the security and the safety to break it before you. Because there is only one anthem in the church, and it is not let it go. It is let me in. It is me going to you and saying, let me in. And it's you, if you are faithful to this text, turning to me and saying, let me in. To lay down before one another some of these things in our lives of significance that we're terrified to share with people. And so I want to talk a little bit about what this means for us. I think where it starts is this reunion, and I am very much so focusing on what happens within our house churches, okay? I'm not saying again that what happens here is not important, but I want you to hear me clearly. This is an hour together. This does not replace life together. Can we embrace that? So I'm talking about our house churches because that's where a lot of the nitty-gritty can happen if we let it happen. And so I'm going to start here by challenging you in this way, with the house churches that you're a part of. Letting others into your life and you're letting others let you into theirs starts with something very simple and yet terribly hard in our frenzied lives. Are you willing to commit yourself to being present, to simply and regularly showing up? Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I am a realist. I really am about this. I'm also not going to spend a lot of time about this because then everyone's going to start getting mad at me. But one of the things that's very simple about hospitality and why I think God pushes us toward it is because hospitality speaks to intimacy. It speaks to smallness. It speaks to just presence. Presence, presence, our very presence. And one of the things about most of our house churches, I think, is that most of them aren't meeting every week. It's every other week. Some senses I sit back and I think to myself, that is weak. I mean, in some senses, that's 2 nights a month. And I recognize there's busyness in our life. Please know that. This last week, I think Sarah and I sit back and realized that we were home together one night this last week. Your life's crazy and my life's crazy. Work calls you, you've got family duties, kids, nephews, nieces, grandkids, all kinds of stuff. I get that. I get that. And I understand that you're not going to be able to be at a smaller house church gathering every single time the group meets. But can you commit as best you can to being there as regularly as you can? And the reason I bring this up is not to be some jerk or some stodgy fundamentalist preacher. It's simply this, that as a minister, I have lost count of how many times you have expressed to me, I want to grow. I want to experience God with others. I want to figure out how to deal with this finally. And what you're looking for are these moments of intensity. And I've talked about this before when it comes to any spiritual discipline, reading the Bible, prayer, anything. Everybody wants to get in an argument about, well, is it frequency or is it intensity? Do I have to do this every day? Look, I don't know how to answer all those questions. I just simply know this. Regularity breeds a lot more opportunity for intensity, doesn't it? If you are wanting what I think you want, you got to be present. And at a very simple level, that's what hospitality is. Someone has invited you into their home, and not only that, but they are saying, because we know what our house churches exist to do, they're saying, I want you into my life. The respectful and the helpful thing to do is to step in. They're letting you in. So can we commit ourselves to that? I'm kind of fickle on this thing, aren't I? I also want to point out that you've got to be willing to let those folks in. Even if they aren't quite the folks you had in mind when you had grand visions of house church in mind. I make no apologies for wanting to revisit some stuff I talked about last week. Because you remember the question that I gave you last week was this. Remember, do you trust that in his power and wisdom, God is drawing together a community at reunion that any way you slice it can be a people among whom your faith and salvation can be sustained for the long term? Because I know one of the things that we wrestle with about whether or not we want to let someone in is, quite frankly, we don't know if they really match up to who we think is actually going to help us if we let them in. That dude's not in his 30s. He doesn't have kids. He's not going to understand what I'm going through. Really? He might be 60 and has kids grown up. He might have something to say. Person's in their 20s, they're just fresh out of college. I don't know. I'm kind of in my 30s. I'm kind of establishing myself. I don't know if they have anything to say. Really? You don't think we can't learn from people of different generations and different ages? We all sometimes carry around a list of folks that we think that's who I'll let in. But are we willing to trust in the wisdom and the power and the sovereignty of God that he is pulling together a community here that any way we ever slice it up, that if this is a brother or sister that wants to help you, do you believe God might be able to help you through that? Because if so, you got to let them in. Now, I find this fascinating. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. This is one of those preacher sneak-up things where I didn't tell you what the whole verse said. But you know this one. This is kind of a weird verse. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Isn't that a weird verse? Show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without even knowing it. This is one of those things where people read that and they wonder, does that mean like maybe sometimes I've reached out to someone I don't know and it was an angel? I guess it could very well mean that. I don't know if it was a touch by an angel or Highway to Heaven kind of moment. Remember Highway to Heaven? That was an awesome show. But I don't know if we really have to take it that far in that supernatural. Because I wonder how much the writer of Hebrews is just simply saying, man, do you remember in the Old Testament How often God showed up in unexpected ways in the people that those people who he showed up to least expected it. And yeah, most directly they were angels, messengers of God. I wonder how much the writer is just simply saying this. Man, the person who's in front of you, you don't know them from Adam. But you never know what God might reveal through them. Because the track record of God from the Old Testament on is that sometimes he is revealing in the most unexpected of people who step into your life. Do you believe that at reunion? Because the constant thread of Scripture says we got to pay attention to it. I think about this a lot, and I'm going to come back to this in a couple weeks. This beautiful line from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I'm still thinking through this because I think this speaks to teaching one another and admonishing one another. Bonhoeffer says, God has willed that we should seek and find his living word in the witness of a brother in the mouth of man. We might not like it, but there's a reason we have all of these one another passages, is that I can discover truth through you and you through me. God has willed that to be through the power of relational community. It's why I think 1 Peter goes on, this is the full context of it, and I love it. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Without grumbling, without complaining. We sliced up house churches, and everyone's like, I don't know if this is going to work. It's one of those things, quite frankly, where I even had to look at myself when I find myself in a new house church. Kind of adopting the same rule I give Eden about food. When I put something out in front of her that's new, and she says, I don't like it. I'm like, you haven't even tried it. Show hospitality and offer hospitality without grumbling. That maybe one of the things we can adopt is this rule that don't complain about it until you've really tried it, until you've really done the next step, I think. Which is you've got to be willing to take a simple but vulnerable step to lay something of significance in your life before those folks and let them navigate the difficulty of it with you. Now, I don't know if you've done that yet in your house church. I'm sure in some house churches that has started to happen. I am absolutely positive it's not happened for everyone yet. This is my challenge to you. It's a challenge that I gave to the house church leaders to make sure this happens. There's not going to be some pressure and someone with some kind of list, like so-and-so hasn't shared yet. But my challenge to you is to be able to step into your house church context and to come into that having spent some time, if you're single, thinking through it, if you've got a spouse, thinking through it with them, in which you're trying to determine what is something I need to lay down before these folks that I might let them in on it. And I don't care how big it is or how seemingly small it is. If you need to ease into it, that's fine. But you need to start letting your house church in. If it's something with work, if it's something with your family, it's something I don't know how to say this, I don't know what to do in this, I don't know what to believe about this, you become vulnerable and take the risk and lay it down before them. Because what you're saying is, I want you to let me in and I want to let you in. Let's get real here. One of those things that's very important for me, and I have told house church leaders this I don't know how many times. Yes, indeed, we do have set curriculum for a night that we meet. It's pretty loose and it's pretty open, but it is a set curriculum. But I have told them, don't you dare hold fast that curriculum if someone in the group introduces a deeper curriculum that's born out of their life. That if someone shows up and says, I am hurting, man, you kick that stuff to the curb and you pour into them because they're letting you in. Can you trust the safety and the security of that? And then, of course, the final step on that is moving forward. We need to be willing to be good stewards of these things of significance. If in our group someone is letting you in, this is stuff that you need to be praying about. This is stuff you need to be checking in on. Like if your group has already had moments like this, then it might be time for you to hit pause and say, the study's been real good, and we've been doing some really great missions work, but you know what, guys? I know we were all dealing with some stuff, and we need to revisit that. That's what it means to be good stewards of that. That God has handed these things to us as a group to think on and to pray on and to reflect on and to untangle. Not to just simply say, well, that's got to be really rough, and we'll say a quick prayer and that's that. But to be good stewards of it. To be practicing hospitality constantly. Because that's the other thing that I find fascinating about each of these. And in 1 Peter and in Hebrews and in Romans and even in the Old Testament context, they are in the form of commandment and they are ongoing. This never ends. It's never a moment where like, well, good, we dealt with those 5 things. Let's go back to just studying. But to keep this culture alive of offering hospitality. Because quite frankly, there's no way, if you're not willing to let me in and I'm not willing to let you in, it's a pretty stupid thing for me to jump right to teach one another or admonish one another, because I don't even know maybe what we ought to be teaching or admonishing, right? It's kind of silly to just come in and say, well, let's just talk about this because it's interesting. When someone over there might be saying, my marriage is falling apart. That's why I didn't skip it. And I repent of even thinking of skipping this. Let's stand, and I want us to sing a song together. I'm going to say a prayer over us for this.